So what is going on today? So last time I did a video, we talked about, and I'll show this one to you. We talked about state. We had some fun with this, but update available. Sure. Get us that new code sandbox. So basically, like, here's a 32 by 32 grid. It's pretty big. Look at that thing. It's huge. And like the whole idea is like I can click on one of these guys and it changes the color pretty instantaneously. And it stays in state. We went through this whole journey of like talking about, well, let's use local state and then use context and then use a reducer to get through the whole flow. And today I'm going to expound a little bit on this and use context and some state management to keep track of a user state, which is like primary use case for context, because when you have a user, usually there's lots of little pieces of the app all throughout. They're going to need access to that little bit of information. So I have prepared a repo here a while ago, which is this MERN template here. And this MERN template came from somewhere else. Here we go. Traversy Media, I guess, talked about this whole thing, maybe. No, that's just deploying to Heroku. I should hunt down who made this thing originally. I've gone through and tweaked it and made it my own, like, pretty extensively. But what I've done is I ripped it apart real recently and created a simplified branch. This simplified branch is simplified. You're right. That's the whole point. To really just emphasize the pieces of authentication, not have a database, and like just really get into the nitty and gritty focus on like what pieces do you need for authentication, what actually are things doing, and stuff like that. And this is specifically in focus with using a Node Express server along with using Passport and using a local authentication strategy. So we're not using like Facebook or Google or anything like that. So I'm gonna come here and we're gonna click New and see if we can do a import project. This didn't work so hot for me the other day. Okay, so it looks okay now. Okay, so this view is great over here because it allows us to see all the containers. So this container here allows us to create a user, like sign up, right? And this will just get saved in the Node server. So if the Node server restarts, like, this information goes away. Here is where we log in. And our flow is like once you sign up, you have to log in. Signing up does not log you in. So once you sign up, you log in. Here are, this is a public route. So anyone in the app can see this route. If you try to do a private action, it tells you that you're unauthorized. You're not allowed to do a private action. If you do a public action, though, it'll be like public routes work. Like, you can do public actions, right? And we'll talk about how these are set up in the app. All right, so let's authenticate ourselves real quick here. So our name is Brian. Our email is test@test.com. Our password is 123456. The password is, again, 123456. And we'll sign up. So then we have Brian. No, this is the email. Test@test and 123456 for the password. All right, so now when we log in, these two routes here, which are currently private, will be visible to us. So think of each of these as different pages in an app, and I'm just rendering all of them so we can see the behavior. So here's the logout piece. So if you're not logged in, you can't log out. So that's why this piece is being hidden. This could have been like a dashboard or something really like top level in the app. And then here's the same code as this code, but it's just hidden behind a private route. So we can't actually see this until we're logged in. So if I do a public action here, public routes work, public routes still work there. If I click this private action, we can see private routes work, and here private routes work as well. So now that we're logged in, private routes work. Our session time is 1 minute. So once we've logged in, we have 1 minute to do things until the session will expire and we'll have to log in again. I'll show you where that's set, and you'll want to make sure that's probably higher for your actual app. But for testing purposes, you know, like if we click here right now, okay, we're working, but like eventually we'll get to the 1 minute mark and these won't. Oh, there it is. So we finally hit 1 minute, and now the private action doesn't work. If I refresh this page, these views won't be visible anymore. I can't log out technically because I'm already logged out, and technically I shouldn't be able to see this view because I'm logged out. But we're not actively checking to see if the user is logged in at this point. So like if I refresh, it'll go back to not being able to see things here. So let's talk about this code, and we do have the app here, so we can talk about pieces and show pieces working really quickly. And let's start in the front end and work our way back to the back end. And so then we'll just kind of do that flow for each route so we can kind of see what's happening. So first is the registration page. So if I come here to well, actually, let's start at the app level. So, sorry, I need to remove all this grommet stuff. I have not yet. In fact, I'll just do it right now real quick. All this grommet stuff is not important. It is just for styling and completely dead now. So this is gone. This is gone. This is gone. All right, so here's the root of the app. We're bringing in React Router to handle different route views based on the router. We have our register page, our login page, our private route, which is based off of the router but checks for authentication. We have our dashboard, which is this view. Nope, sorry, this view here. This says Logout. That's the dashboard. And interactions is the view that we see here that we're checking actions. So like I can't do private actions, but I can do public actions. This is the login page, and this is the register page. So here we're bringing in our auth component, which we will talk about in a moment. This is using context. But our whole app is first wrapped in auth, which is our authentication context. Then we have our router. And then inside of here we have the app, and then we have each chunk here is a route. And so we're showing all of them right now. We're saying if we match the exact path root, render this component. So we're at the root, so we're going to render all of these components. So again, if you don't understand how React Router works, then go understand that before we move on. We'll talk a little bit about the private route here, but the private route comes directly from their documentation. I didn't invent anything here. It is their stuff. So let's start with register. So when we go to register, the register component here, the register component is using the auth context, which we set up, right? From the auth context, and I'll walk through it in a little bit, but we have a user. We have, because this is the register page, we have a method to register users. And then we also have this errors object, which is actually pretty cool. So if I just were to hit sign up now, we get these errors back from the database. And when we get these back from the database, we can actually just use this errors object to display these errors, which is really helpful and kind of cool. We're using individual state here, or use state here for each input field. Use effect here is on the register page. We're just checking, is there a user? Because if there is, they shouldn't be on the register page. If you're logged in, you should go to the dashboard. So this is just something I've commented out because otherwise all of these routes would like reroute us to the dashboard, and I don't want that. I want us to be able to see everything. But in a real application, this is exactly what we would do. right? So if I'm at the register page and I'm already logged in, if there is a user, then move them to the dashboard page. They don't need to hang out here, right? So here's our whole form here. Okay, these are each individual input. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it is React, and I kind of expect you to understand how React works. But I will talk about our submit here. So our submit form, we prevent the default on the form submission. We create a new user based off name, email, password, and password too. And then we call the register method that we got here from our context. All right. We're also passing history because the context will take history into account and navigate us. Technically, we could use the history hook and not pass it around, which I would totally recommend doing at this point rather than passing it around. But I haven't taken the time to clean it up that much. Our errors that are showing up here are just spans, and it's just errors.name, errors.email, so it's just the way the errors are structured. But other than that, these are just labels with inputs, and then down here we have the button to submit. All right, so there's not too much going on here. These are the set state methods on each input, grabbing the values. Really, the only crazy thing going on here is this register, which is coming from the context, and also checking our user here in a use effect. So before we move on, let's go check out that use context so we can see what's going on. So our app, like I said, uses the auth component here, which is the provider and the context setup for authentication within our front end piece. Right, so here's context itself being set up. And then all the way down here, we have our auth component. Our auth component has users, errors, login, logout, register users, all coming off of use auth. And use auth is our own custom hook here, which basically is keeping track of state for the users and the errors. We're checking to see if there's a local storage JWT token. If there is, we're going to set the auth token based on the token that is there. Set auth token is in our utils, and it's basically saying Axios every time we use you to make a call, you're going to have a default headers authorization equal this token. If a token is not passed in, then we're deleting that from Axios so that authorization is undefined. This piece here is very important for the backend. We'll come back to this and talk about how this works. But essentially, when I am clicking this private action here, it's right now saying there's no authorization and sending it so that it says that it's not authorized. But once we get a token in a little bit, we'll actually land here and we'll get authorized. So so where were we? All right, so this is the provider then that's provided. We already, sorry, our use auth is where we're at. So set auth token, we're decoding the token, and when we decode it, essentially it gives us the user structure so that we have a user to use. We also have the current time, and then we can decode the expiration time versus the current time to find out whether or not the user should be logged in. Now we need to divide by 1,000 here because our current time is in seconds. And so basically the decoded expiration, it's like there's an expiration date, which for us is 1 minute later after creating it. So once that's happened, we will log out the user on the front end. Logout user could have some better effects in causing some UI to update, but I haven't set that up. But that's kind of like what this little piece here is doing, and That's just separated out to make this piece here not so complicated. So we're just moving the complication out here, so it's just one simple use effect that's checking everything, and then we build it all up into an object here, which we destructure here, and we take the same information and drop it into the value for our provider. So these are the pieces that we have access to when we use context throughout all of our components. We have access to the user, the errors, the login user method, the logout user method, and the register method. And like I said, starting at the register method, we have access to this, and that's what we've ran. The children here are the rest of the app, which if we go peek at app, that's the whole router piece here. This is what the children are on the React side. That is a lot. Oh geez, I didn't want to do that. Open back up. So when we come to the register piece, again, there's not a lot going on here. There's just a lot of weight happening, a lot of things happening and moving pieces in this auth context piece, which comes from here. All right, so what happens when we actually run register user? All right, so let's find where register user is defined. So this is where we're going to take our first journey into the back end. All right, so when we take that journey into the back end, it is going to get very, very, a lot of code. Very, I don't want to say complicated, but there's just a lot going on. And we'll kind of walk through everything that's happening. And hopefully by removing the database and stuff, it makes it a little bit easier, and you can just see where you'd want to add in hooks to your database. So again, let's just make a new user. So we'll call him Brian. The email we'll call test2@test.com. The password is 123456. Again, the password here is 123456. And I have some console oh, I cannot do anything. I have some console logs here, so you'll see that it printed out a handful of things here in relation to users being existent now, right? So here's the test2@test.com. The name is Brian, the email, and here's the password, but that's not the password we put in. And so this is what the server is saving and outputting. This is what we'd put in our database. It's a hashed password, and I'll show you all of that happening. So API users register is when we click to that register button, this is what happens, right? So we do Axios. We talked about that set auth token. Right now, there isn't one. Okay, so this is where we've deleted the auth header. There is no authorization header that equals token, not a thing. Okay, so then we're posting to API users register. We're sending the user data. We're waiting for registered to have happened. If it happens, then we have the console registered happen. Otherwise, we catch the error and we say, hey, here was the error. All right, so let's go check out what this route is doing. So I'm going to close the client part for a moment, and let's start with the server. So the server is set up. We brought in the user's API routes. And then down here we said use the user at API/users, use these users. Now, there's some stuff going on here with Express that might be confusing or different for you. I am not going to spend time talking about it. Just know that this is our root route now when we go to the users file. So now all of these routes have that API users part in front of them already. And so now this is our register route. This is API users register. Right, so first we're validating the form. This is a method that goes through, validates the form, and returns the errors if things aren't correct. That's how we get the red stuff. So this method is basically looks at the stuff, gives us back our error structures. Okay, it's a very helpful thing to do. I'm not going to cover this because this really isn't part of Auth, but it's good feedback to your users. Server.js, where'd you go? Oh, we're already in here now. So register, we hit this route, okay? We first start checking to see if they're valid. We'll send back for 100, here are the errors, here are the problems. Next, we're going to take user and do users by email. So this is my database. This is how I would do like users.find this email. And essentially right now we're checking to see if someone already is set up by this email. This is just an object where the email is the key to the value. So this is the users by email object where the keys are the email, right? So I'm basically able to just drop email in here as the key. And if we get a user, then we can say, hey, that email's already been used. Databases, we'd want to set up that the email key is unique and some other stuff like that, and it would handle that. And we would be finding or looking up in the database by email at this point. If we don't have a user, then we know that we're going to create a new user. So here's the information coming in, and now this password still needs to be hashed. Right now it is in plain text and it's awesome, so please don't console log at this point. You don't want to be responsible for people's passwords and having a security issue. Then we're using bcrypt to generate a salt for a hashed password for them, right? So we're generating a salt based on 10, and we're doing a new password here, okay? So this part here will generate a new password for them, or a hashed password, and that's what's being saved here. If someone gets this, this is great, like big deal. If they have this, they can't get the password unless they have the secret to undo it. So that's the one part that we've got to be careful with. And so the way authentication works is we actually, here when they type in their password, we will hash it again and see if the hashes match, because we don't know what their password was. But when it's hashed, we know what it is. So the new user password equals the hash. Then we're right here able to push the new user into our users by ID in our email. So think of this as like we've indexed by ID, we've indexed by email, and then this is just a straight up array of the users. This is overkill, but this is where we save the user to the database at this point with this information, so that when we do an authentication, we can actually check against it. All right, so we've created a user. So now let's try and log in as this user. So I'm going to take this username here. We'll drop it in here. We're going to take the password, which I probably shouldn't be able to copy and paste it, but 1, 2, 3, oh geez, I can't count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And we log in. Right now, login should work. Now private action works, public action works. So let's follow from the app perspective the login. All right, so login, it's doing the same context piece here, right? So we have login on the context. All right, so if I come all the way down here, we're grabbing this state and we're dropping login user. All right, so again, we only have 1 minute before this will run out, which is okay. So it's still working, and I'll show you where that 1 minute happens now. So we're going to hit the API at login, which we'll go check out in a moment, but eventually we will get a response back. That response will have the token. This is where we set the JWT token, which is an acronym for something that I can never remember. I apologize on that one. But we're going to take the token here and save it in our local storage here, right? Then we're going to set the auth token, which I told you was important, and then we just lost our login page. No, it wasn't login page. It was now our auth.js file. There we go. All right, so we're going to set auth, which again, set auth passes in the token, and now Axios will have a default header for the token. All right, so any other file that uses Axios, which now we're not authorized, will pass the header along with the authorization token so the backend can do stuff with it. And there's 2 ways to handle it, and I will show you that in just a moment. So once the user is logged in, we save the stuff, we decode it again, we set the user. If there are errors, we'll console log those errors. But essentially at this point, our user is authenticated on the front end via this token, right? And because of this set auth token, anytime we make a request, we will send, or sorry, the authorization will send the token back to the backend so it can try and decode it and figure out, hey, was this person authorized or not? All right. So let's go to the backend now. So again, in the server, we'll just start there again. The server is saying, hey, we have an API users route. So we'll go to users, and we have an API users login get hit. All right. So first, again, we're going to check to see if it's valid. If not, we'll send back the errors. So for example, if I get rid of the password here and I log in, it says password field is required. If I type in the wrong password, it says the password is incorrect. I prefer to be more generic there and say like the username or password is incorrect so that like people can't be like, oh, I was right with an email but wrong with the password. But again, if we type in the right password, we clearly aren't clearing our errors, but we are logged in now again. So then off the body, we're grabbing the email and password. I am logging out the email here. I am also logging out users by email because I was having some problems, but users by email is like our find in our database, all right? I'm just using this object here locally to just kind of pull away from the database so we're not getting lost in understanding authentication by the database. We're just literally saving it. That's all we got to do. Passport is taking care of all the other pieces. So if there was no user, sorry, we didn't find you. Let's move on. If there was a user, now we're going to use bcrypt.compare. And we're going to pass the password in, and we're going to also pass in the user password. Bcrypt compare will take the password that's passed in, the password that we have saved. It'll run the hashing algorithm and say, do I create the same password? If it is a match, then we will move on. If it's not a match, here we'll say the password is incorrect, which we've seen that error, right? So if I type in here nothing and log in, we get incorrect. Okay, and that's because, again, when we ran this compare, we passed in some random chunk of stuff I just typed, and we compared it to the hash that was created with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and it does not match. So then we say, hey, incorrect password. If it is a match, though, so if I do type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and type in the correct password here, what will happen is we will get in here, and it'll be a match. We'll say that the payload here is equal to the ID of the user ID. Oh, you're going to hibernate on me, huh? Jeez. That's okay. Oh man, it's like your password was like leaked here. Good job. Okay, so then our name and username here. So the only reason that error showed up has nothing to do with the app. It has something to do with running my app in Code Sandbox here. Like Chrome was like, and it wants me to refresh the whole container at this point, which is annoying. I'm not gonna. There we go. I can click that button. So we have our payload, okay, and then we're signing the token, right? This is where we make the JWT token that we pass to the front end, and this token has a lot of really cool information for us. It looks very specific, but right here expires in 60 seconds, right? You're gonna want this to be a higher number in your actual app, but in this case, I have it as a lower number so that we can see it expire, right? I don't want to be here for like a year to see it expire, or 5 days or whatever, right? So this is in seconds, right? Not milliseconds. We're used to doing a lot of things in milliseconds in JavaScript, but here, for whatever reason, we went with seconds, which is fine. No complaints. So next we will move on to the what's going on here? This is the callback, essentially. And if we're able to make the token, we'll have the token. Otherwise, there would be an error. I'm not doing anything with the error, which is pretty bad. Should do something with the error here, like something like this, and be like, couldn't log you in for whatever reason. Try again. And then we will respond back with the token, right? Which is in the JSON. So if we go back to the response coming in on the auth piece, again, like I said, the response has data which has token in it. And this is what we save, which allows other parts of our app to work. And so that's the next piece. All right, so that whole flow happened. Set auth has happened, right? So we have that token. And now we're going to step into, on the front end, the interactions page. I would do the dashboard logout stuff, but we're going to cover just as much going through the interactions. Logout will just end up running the logout functionality, delete the token and stuff like that. So I'm not, we'll run it when we're all done. It'll be the last thing. We'll walk through. It's no big deal. Okay, so here's our interactions page. Okay, interactions literally has two buttons. It's a post to API v1 interactions private. And remember, we're using Axios because we've set the auth token on Axios. Whatever other technology you want to use to make calls is fine. Just make sure that you're setting the header's common authorization equal to the token that you got, so that when you make calls, you're passing that along. So the first one is to private. The second one is to public. These effectively behave the same. Okay, so we make the call. We're sending a type private or a type public to the backend, which we're not doing anything with other than logging it so we can see it happen. Then when it's resolved, we're taking the response data and setting whatever response we got back, which will be a string of either it works, unauthorized, or it works. So like private routes work or public routes work, or it's unauthorized. We're just setting that to the data, which is just a state value, which if we look at response, right here, response.message is getting logged or like displayed in an H1. All right. So again, if I come here and I click this guy, we're unauthorized, right? So what happens is we've hit private action route, and so now we're going to go to the back end and see why we see unauthorized. So on the back end, we're going to the server. Right, the server says, hey, we hit interactions, right? We hit API v1 interactions right here. And then because we hit that, we're going to come to interactions file. And inside of here, I have some stuff that could be deleted, but I'm not going to, and I'll show you why. And then we were hitting the private route. So the first thing the private route does is uses some middleware right here to authenticate. And it's using the Jwt strategy to authenticate, and we're saying that the session is false. Not gonna lie, I don't know exactly why these are the way they are, but this is like basically copy and paste from the documentation. You can go read it and understand what's going on. But essentially at this point, we're checking to see if there is an active session based on this Jwt, or maybe it's saying that not based on the session, but just is there an active, that's gotta be session based. Is there an active Jwt based on this, right? Like, did all the stuff that we get from local storage on the front end actually work? IES asks a really good question, which I'll get to in just a minute, talking about APIs that expire in 20 minutes. So we'll talk about that because we're dealing with an expiration in 1 minute right now. But anywho, this is our same request and response callback that we use in all of our posts and stuff. Like, it's the same one as right here, right? We just have an additional middleware that we're doing before we do it, right? We can actually stack as many functions, I'm pretty sure, as we want in here, and Express will call this one, then it'll call this one, then the next one, eventually it will get to this one where we actually use response and send a message, right? So what we're saying here is at this point that you were authed and that private route works. But when we click this, we don't get that, right? And what's happening is right here, this middleware is saying, you are not authorized to be here. You are not logged in, right? So this fails, okay? But if I were to come up here, type in test at test.com, this is like the first one we created, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and log in, and it doesn't exist anymore. So I'm gonna create everything again. Brian, test at test.com. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sign up. All right, now if we log in, now if I click private action, it works, right? Because when we ran this here, this passport authenticate piece, it said, hey, you are definitely authed. So let's send back the message of private route works, right? Now, I'm not going to go deep into the passport's actual setup and what's going on. I'm more focused on like just getting things like working and talking about the pieces, but it is all here. If you go to config, there is a passport.js file, and this is not terribly crazy. We're just telling it how it's going to work. We're telling it that the key comes from keys.secret. So this is the in ops, this is our secret or key that's used to hash passwords. So you do not want people finding this or getting this. But hey, in our case, it's just right here. It's just the word secret. You don't want it here. You want it to be a lot more complex and somewhere else, preferably a process environment that's stored on your deployment system. All right, so that's a kind of an important thing to keep track of and not have out in the open like I do, but it's just there for ease of use. We're just telling it to use to create a new JWT strategy, and we're using, so like this is middleware, so we're using it on Passport. We're doing console log. Is this a party? But anywho, we're doing the user by ID based on the JWT payload ID, and if there is a user, then we can move on. Otherwise, we'll return false, and this is where things blow up. Right, so this is where that error is coming from when we're not logged in, because we returned false. So then that middleware that we're doing, was it here? Yes, so the middleware here is blowing up essentially because of what's going on here, because we didn't find a user. Right, so this is the setup stuff. There's a little bit more setup for it in our server file. So here's passport, and we're telling it to initialize, and we're telling the config passport to get the passport that we've set up here. So it's all using the same passport. But other than that, there's really not a lot going on, and I will spend basically no more time on the passport stuff itself. But here's our route, right? So this is one way. Another way to check for whether or not it's private, and I'm just gonna like walk through this real quick and not actually run it here. But what we can do is actually grab the header authorization ourselves, and we can use Jwt Verify to verify it. We just actually have to pass in our secret here, right? So if we do this little guy here, it's the same as doing all of this, but now we have a lot more control. And so now I can actually respond back with "you are not authenticated." And I can respond back with private routes work, or "you are not authenticated," or I can do like a catch overall the whole thing if something doesn't work right, like if the authorization token like blows up, I can be like, hey, you are not authenticated, right? And then we can do littler checks here based on the user ID, because maybe they send a token, but the token doesn't give us an ID that allows us to find a user ID, so we can say "you are not authenticated." All right, so this same thing works just like this one, but gives us a little bit better potential control and feedback, but there's more that I have to do. So I am actually going to show you it in action, which means everything will get refreshed. But hey, here's Brian. Email is b@b.com. Password is 123456. 123456. Sign up. Again, b@b.com. 123456. Log in. All right, and public. What the heck? Not now. What is going on? I broke it. I broke it. Come on. So yes, asks, how would you handle tokens for an API that expire in 20 minutes? Request a new one every time, or have a list or something of keys used? That's a really good question. My question to you, yes, is this like do you have control of the back end and the front end, or do you just have control of the front end, like the client part that's requesting access, and it will expire in 20 minutes, so you only have 20 minutes to do stuff? Is that kind of like the flow, or do you have control of the back end and can like have each piece kind of talking to each other in a different way? I just trying to get a little bit of understanding there, so I can answer that question better. So here's b at b.com. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Sign up. So now we should be able to create this user, b at b.com, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and log in. And public action. There we go. And then private action. So now private action says private route works. All right. So if I click log out, which we haven't gone through that flow yet, we will in a moment, but if I click private route, now it says you are not authenticated. All right. So rather than just saying unauthorized, we now are using this flow and having a lot more control over the response to the user, which could be good or bad. It just kind of depends on your scenario. All right, so let's see. That's that piece. We've talked about the interactions. Back on the front end, there is the private route, which we did not spend a lot of time talking about, but this private route right here literally pretty much comes from React Router's documentation. We're using the user context here. We're grabbing the user. We're saying if there is a user, render the component that was passed in. If there's not a user, then say, hey, you are not authenticated. And what we really should be doing, though, because this would be a page, is we would redirect them to the login page. Right? So this would be the helpful part we would rather be doing here. But since this is not a app, particularly like a real app, and we're just trying to show the flow, I just want you to see hey, you're not authenticated, so this is a protected route because we're not logged in. But if I click this login button, we are now logged in, so we can see this. The last piece is that logout button, so let's go check it out. So that's in the dashboard. So dashboard here pulls in the user and the logout. We're grabbing the user here and showing their name, like, hey there, B. And then when we click that button for logout, we're presenting the default and executing logout. So let's go look at logout. These props can probably go away because I'm not using them right now because we've got the context stuff passing stuff around, and we're not really using history either. Prop types. Look at this. We're just cleaning up some stuff real quick. Sorry. What was the other thing? History. That'll restart our server. But hey, so the log out piece, right? So I click log out. This takes us to the auth context. And all the way down here, you'll see that logout was the last function that we passed that we have not looked at. And wow, we're just following this all around. Here it is. Here is logout user. So logout user literally just goes to the local storage, removes the token. We go to set auth, which we've talked about this guy before, and we say false. So this becomes false, and we run this and delete the authorization header from Axios. Back to auth. So we remove it. So now when we make a request, or if we refresh the page or whatever, we're not authenticated on the front end. We can't pass a session that makes sense to the back end. We expired it. So even though it might have had another 30 seconds before it expired, we got rid of it. And then we set the user to null, which is our default value for user, I believe. Yes. So it's just as if user had just been created. And that's the flow. I will not lie, this part here is a little weird. Login user is the execution of login user, and if you look at login user does this thing here, and you're probably like, what the heck is going on here? Login user executes this and then returns this function here. It's called currying. It's a really common practice in coding in general. So basically, I'm creating a function here, passing in these two values so that this function here will have access to set user and set errors whenever I execute it. So it's a way to create a function that I don't want everything to execute right away, but needs some additional information for its setup. There's probably different ways I could have written it, but this is the route that I went. I don't know why. This is fun to me, but maybe not fun to everybody else. But in a nutshell, that is how this whole system is working. I don't know how helpful that was, but I'm kind of running short on time. I hope you guys have a good night. And again, this if you go to my my page here on GitHub, this code was in Mern template, and in Mern template you can come to the branches and you should be able to find a simplified branch here at the bottom, and this branch here is the one that has this like simplified version to help you see the auth flow. So have fun coding. Again, back to Ayes's question, if I'm working only on the front end or the client part to an API that expires every 20 minutes, just whenever I got a request that says it wasn't authenticated, I would just run through the authentication flow again and get a new auth. It could be annoying, but there's probably a reason why there's a 20-minute cutoff, and so just forcing it to run through the auth is probably what you got to do. You could maybe set up, if you don't feel comfortable like doing that on the front end or something, you might be able to set up something on the back end to like request auth again and then somehow get that stuff to the front end if it has to make a request from the front end, or you can just always make those requests through a back end and keep it pretty secure. But yeah, other than that, I'm not so sure. Without like knowing the details of what's going on, it'd be kind of hard to point you in a direction of how to solve that problem. But anyway, it's been a good night. We're at an hour, and I'm trying to just keep it to an hour and be more informational and have some fun that way for a little bit. But eventually, we'll get more structure and get going here. I'm currently in the process of adjusting my life quite a bit. We've got a baby on the way, and so it might be kind of hit or miss with me until probably the baby comes, which is going to be end of March. So we've got basically 2 more months of this really sporadic stuff and me trying to really figure out what we're doing on this stream, because I enjoy it. We have some people coming here and having fun. And like today, literally, there was like 1 person, but hey, who cares? I don't care. It was fun. We'll see y'all later. Bye.